Today on the podcast, I have Gabrielle Dolan. Gabrielle, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm in Ottawa, Canada. You are all the way on the other side of the world, but we're managing to connect thanks to technology.
Yes, I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and I can let you know what happened overnight if you want.
So, as a Canadian and as a parent, I can tell you the big Australian cultural artifact in our lives was the Wiggles. For many years, the Wiggles were on our TV. We were buying the DVDs. I have myself attended, I believe, three Wiggles concerts. So, thank you for your cultural export of song.
Yeah, and now it's probably Bluey if you've got kids, the
Of
cartoon character
course,
Bluey.
I did.
Yeah.
How did I not think of Bluey? My youngest is all about Bluey, so absolutely.
Yes.
So,
Well, I've little backstory on the Wiggles. I did attend a Wiggles concert with my kids, but before the Wiggles were the Wiggles, they were actually a pop band and called the Cockroaches. And I saw them at a pub when I was about 20.
amazing. I love that. Incredible. So, Australia really is a small world.
It is. It is. Well, it's a large world, but small.
So, I was looking up your history, your background, and a lot of the work that you do in communications and corporations and these sorts of things. Your leadership and business background in education makes a lot of sense. But then I saw that your expertise and interest in storytelling actually began while you were working with a bank. So I'd love to hear, how did a place focused on money and numbers become the place where you started thinking about the value of storytelling?
Yeah, so I worked at one of Australia's largest banks for nearly 2 decades, and it was in the last couple of years in my, I was in senior leadership role, so I was managing people, but I was predominantly in a change management role. So we were rolling out major, digital transformation and organizational change. And it was in that capacity that I noticed that when I shared a story, and it was like a personal story, as it wasn't related to work, but I connected it back to work, it seemed to get the message across better. People sort of seemed to go, "Oh yeah, I guess that sort of makes sense." Now, it wasn't a magical silver bullet, but what I did start to notice is the really good leaders that I saw, the really inspiring, influential leaders were sharing stories. You'd go to a conference and you'd see speaker after speaker, and you'd go, "Oh, that they were a brilliant speaker," and then I noticed they were brilliant because they were sharing stories. So I started to I think storytelling's a skill. I think it's a leadership skill. I think absolutely a communication skill, an influencing skill. And so that's when I started to notice it. And then over the next probably year or so, I noticed it more and more. And I had in previous roles done a lot of design and delivery of leadership programs. So I knew I could design and deliver training. And I was so convinced that storytelling was a skill, I just decided that I think I'm going to leave corporate and teach leaders how to communicate more effectively through stories. At this was 21 years ago. At the time, our kids were 2 and 5, and I just thought, if it doesn't work out, I'll spend time with the kids, and I'll just go back and get another job. That's what I thought if it didn't work out. It'd be fair to say that 21 years later and 8 books later, it has worked out.
So you said you decided to give teaching a shot. What do you see the relationship between teaching and writing books?
Yeah, so teaching, I was actually teaching people how to tell stories. So,
Hmm.
I would, get leaders go into organizations, run in-house workshops. Sometimes I do public workshops and actually teach them the skill of how I want to get this message across. How do I find the most appropriate story to do that? And then how do I tell that story in a really succinct and effective way? Now, that is, once you learn that skill, you can use that when you're presenting on stage. You can use it with your team, but you can use it in the written format as well. So, regardless of how you're delivering the story, whether that's in a book, whether that's in a newsletter to your team, or whether it's actually you're just saying it, It's teaching them the skill of storytelling them, and then helping them explore all the different ways that they can actually share those stories across different mediums, like even in video now, for example.
Did you see the new career as teaching as parallel to being an author, or was becoming, this prolific author a nice side benefit?
So Kevin, I'm going to let you and your listeners in on a little secret. Is that I failed English in my final year of school. I put it down to that. I think I was predominantly a bit lazy. I was a lazy student. I was just I had this thing of like, well, 50%'s a pass. And I missed it. I got like 49%, so I just missed out. So the fact that I've written 8 books is a massive surprise, probably to me and my English teacher. Is So I went for about 10 years, and I never thought of writing a book at all. Like it didn't even enter, why would I write a book? And it was only when I was working with a business coach and he was talking about if you want to be seen as the expert in your field. And look, and at that time, 10 years in, no one was talking about storytelling. I was probably only one of a handful of people around the world teaching people storytelling and seeing it as a skill. So I sort of wrote the book, and I co-wrote the book then with my business partner. That was a very long process, the first book. And
They
ever
always
since
are, those
then,
first
they always
ones.
are like you got no idea what you're doing, no idea what you're doing. And then that led to another book, and that led to another book, and that led to another book. And so yeah, it was purely a business reason. I wrote the book to say, okay, this is credibility. I then actually discovered that I actually liked the process of writing. I liked the process of thinking and developing my thinking, and actually started to really enjoy the process of writing. So then I wrote quite a few more books, and it was. I wrote my previous book about 5 years ago, and I truly thought that would be my last book I write on storytelling. I mean, there's only so many books you can write on the one subject. But my latest book is I just felt compelled to write, and it's called Story Intelligence. So ultimately, it's a storytelling book, but the subtitle is The Craft of Authentic Storytelling Made Smarter with AI. And the reason I felt truly compelled to write this book is about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I had more and more people. They'd be sitting in my workshops. I'd be teaching them the whole power of storytelling. And I would get questions like, well, will AI replace storytelling? It was like, no. And it actually horrified me that people were even asking that question. And so it was like, no. And then people increasingly asked me, can you use AI with your stories? And Kevin, my initial reaction was like, no, no, that's cheating. You can't do that. But I thought, well, I better sort of start experimenting with using AI in the storytelling process. And I was disturbingly surprised how good it was. And I say disturbingly because I thought, oh, this could be dangerous. So I spoke to my publisher about the concept of this book, that in a world of AI generated content, and in a world of distrust, I truly believe that our stories are needed now more than ever. But how you can use AI to help find your stories and refine your stories, but the most important thing is to not lose your voice in the process. So that's the concept of the book. And like I said, it was I actually felt compelled to write this one.
Well, I want to come back to that book in a moment, but first, I know you've spoken with lots of major big corporations, companies people would know. Having done this so many times, what do you see as being the major communication problems within big organizations?
Yeah, that's a. I reckon if you and I knew the answer to that, we could probably make a lot of money. But I do. I'll have a. I'll have a. I think I know the problem. Just don't think there's an easy solution.
Mm.
So there's I often quote George Bernard Shaw, who says the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion it's taken place. So I think when it comes to communication, and especially in large organizations, It's we're losing the effective communication as it goes down this cascading effect. So, the CEO and the senior execs might understand something really well. They might understand the strategy. Let's say it's communicating a strategy, for example. They understand it because they've spent hours, days, weeks, even months discussing it. And so they know it inside and out. And so by default, they have this curse of knowledge. They understand it really well. And then it gets cascaded down in, probably a very polished PowerPoint presentation, in, a 1 hour presentation, for example. And they get really frustrated. People don't get it because they're explaining it in a way. So they understand it so well, but they're explaining it in a way that is often numbers. It's all about the numbers, and that doesn't have an impact. There's too much emphasis on the logic when they're explaining things. So they think if they logically prove why we need to do this change, people will see it logically and get on board. But of course, we're emotional beings and we make decisions based on emotion. So there's and that's where I think story can come in. So there's a lot of factors. I think another factor too is a lot of people in organizations get promoted because of their technical capability. So they're really, really good at their job and they get promoted. And then they're really good at that job and they get promoted. And then all of a sudden they find themselves leading people where now their technical ability is not that important. The most important thing they need is communication skills. That's what they need as a leader. Um, and and a lot of people struggle with that because all of a sudden they've got to do this, and some organizations are very good at providing their leaders training around this, and some organizations are not so good, but either way this is a new skill that someone has to learn. And yeah, that's I reckon they're the three reasons why I see communication go so badly in organizations.
So before the printing press, before the written word, humans have always been telling stories. Has the way we tell stories and the types of stories that we told changed over thousands of years, or have we been telling ourselves the same stories throughout history?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I don't think the stories have changed. And so you said at the intro, I'm from Australia. Australia has the longest running culture in the world with our First Nations people, and their Dreamtime stories have stayed in place for tens of thousands of years, and the message has stayed intact. So they have delivered their messages around their culture and their beliefs through these stories over tens of thousands of years. So it's like you got to look no further. Some people say to me, "Oh, is storytelling a fad?" I was like, "No, storytelling is we've always, as human beings, we are hardwired to tell stories. We've always told stories. We've just gone into business and thought, oh, that's not professional, and we need, facts and figures and bullet points and flow charts and stuff like that to get the message across, and it just doesn't work. But so if you think about, in the book I talk about the four types of stories that you should consider sharing. One of them's the parable. I mean, we've told I don't know. I tell parables to my kids. Like teachers share parables all the time. Like the boy who cried wolf, that type of thing. So those stories are still really, really powerful and effective. The parable, what the actual parable you're sharing might change, but it's still a parable, and it's a really good teaching story. The other types of stories are the public stories. So these are well-known public stories that we often share. And then the other two are professional and personal stories. So your professional stories and your personal stories. That the actual stories might change, but ultimately we're covering off on those same types of stories.
If I'm an author looking to market my books, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm going on Kevin's podcast. I'm going to be interviewed. I need some stories to tell. And we've got, personal stories, professional stories, parables, public stories. I'm guessing certain types of stories have certain impacts, or certain types of stories probably achieve different effects. Can you talk about a bit about that? How people can approach using perhaps all four types?
Yeah, yeah, and they do have serve a different purpose. Even I have some people sort of say talk about a case study, and I
Mm.
say a case study is not a story; it's a case study. It's still really valuable. It just serves a different purpose than a story. So I would say that parables, as I spoke about, provide great teaching. Like it's a great teaching moment, and you would use that to provide, perhaps to provide advice to someone and mentoring. And whether, again, whether that's your kid or one of your team members, or you just want to get a message across, or a student, they can be really powerful. Now, again, the parables might change. They might not all be about the boy who cried wolf. I still remember, and I put this as an example in my book when I was doing my MBA. I did an MBA in management and leadership. I don't know, a long time ago now, probably like it's 30 years ago. Um, and one of the subjects we were doing was competitive advantage. And it was when that term was relatively new back then. And I still remember the lecturer trying to explain what competitive advantage meant. And he used a parable, and he said it's like two CEOs go walking in the woods and they come across an attacking grizzly bear. And the first CEO calmly grabs a pair of, runners from their backpack and starts to put them on. And the second CEO says, "Are you mad? We can't outrun an attacking grizzly bear." And he said, "I know, but I sure as hell can outrun you." And Kevin, I'm going to say it's probably the one thing I remember from my entire MBA is that story. So it's a teaching moment, right? Um, public stories tend to be some of the case studies. It was like, you want a great example on innovation, you'll find a great story about Steve Jobs or something. So it's public stories. Both those stories are powerful, but they tend to. I don't learn much about you when you're sharing the story, so I don't get to know you any better. The power with the professional and personal stories is I get to know you a little bit better. So they're still used to communicate the message. Professional stories, these are the ones you'd typically share, like in a job interview, for example, when someone's, tell me about a time when, and you're going to share a relevant work related story. So they can be really powerful. The most powerful ones, though, and they're the most underutilized in business, are your personal stories. So, how you share a non work related story and connect it to a work message. Really, really powerful when you're talking about things like values, whether they're the company values or whether they're your values. That, if you sort of want to be known as transparent, for example, if you share a personal story around that, and perhaps when you weren't transparent, when you didn't tell the whole truth and the regret you have of that, then I get to know you better. And what that does, and all the research shows this, that because I've made a connection with you and I get to know you better through the story, it can actually fast track trust and credibility or strengthen trust and credibility. So if you've met someone for the first time, it can fast track that relationship. But if this is someone that it can strengthen the relationship. And when it comes to writing, and especially writing books or whatever, I put a lot of personal stories in my books because I I think what it does, it creates a relationship between me and the reader. They have never met me, but through hearing some of my personal stories about me growing up or about my kids or about stuff I've done, they feel like they know me, and that's the advantage of the personal story. So the other stories can get your message across, but the personal story gets your message across and builds a connection.
So you mentioned that we think we make decisions based on logic. In fact, we make decisions based on emotion. If I am then trying to convince someone via a story or influence a decision someone makes, I'm guessing I don't throw logic completely out the window. How do I find that balance between
Yeah.
bringing logic to the argument, but also acknowledging that ultimately it's going to be emotion that's going to get my point across?
Yeah, yeah, and it is, and every human does this. So I've some people go, "Oh, but yeah, but I've got to present to the finance team." They don't make decisions on emotion. I go, if they're human, they do, and so I I again, yeah, you are not throwing out the logic. You're not just going, let's get rid of all the logic and just go story, story, story. And so it's not about that. But in business, we have too much emphasis on logic. So what I say is go, okay, you've got all the logic and it makes logical sense. And I'm getting, and sometimes in business, you sort of make this assumption that surely you're not trying to convince me of something that doesn't make logical sense. So to me, it's almost like a given. It's logical, but like we keep banging our head up against a brick wall, just going logic, logic, logic. So I sort of say, how could you potentially share a story that's going to get people to think, feel, or do something different? And to do that, you have to tap into emotion. Now, I'm not saying your story has to be emotional, but it's got to tap into emotion. Can I provide you an example that I think will highlight this, right? I did some work with a risk team. So I was the entire risk team. And the head of risk, her name was Rosemary. And Rosemary was saying that one of the biggest challenges that I have in my job is that when I talk to the business units I support around risk, they just look at me and go, well, you're the risk manager, that's your job. And she said, it doesn't matter how many times I have explained to them, I cannot manage your risk. All I can do is help you manage your risk. She goes, the message doesn't get through, the behavior doesn't change. She was sort of saying, I've provided case study after case study, I've done example after example. She goes, I've tried everything. She'd tried everything except a personal story. So she was going with logic to try to get them to change, to accept the fact that they need to manage their risk, not her. She had tried logic. And that logically makes sense. So you would go, yeah, well, that logically makes sense, but it wasn't working. This is the story she started to share. She said, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm. And growing up on a farm, there was all these dangers we needed to be aware of, but mum would teach us what to do. So we knew what to do when we came across a redback spider in the timber heap. We knew about all the potential traps in the dam after heavy rain. And we knew what to do if we ever came across a snake in summer. And I remember this day, mum was telling me to get my bike from the front gate. So I ran down to get my bike and then I just froze because in front of my bike was this massive copperhead snake. But I remembered everything mum taught us to do. So I played statues and I slowly walked backwards until there was enough space between me and the snake. And I ran back to the house to tell mum. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of the role we play in risk. All I can do is give you the skills, knowledge, and advice. So when you come across your own copperhead snake, regardless of what that looks like, you will know what to do. So, Kevin, can I ask you three questions? Does that story help you understand the message of a risk manager better and the role you play in risk?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now it's like going, oh, okay, I get it now. Will you remember that story? Do you think you'll remember it?
Yes.
Yeah, you will. And I can talk a little bit about why you will remember it. And the third question is if you had to, could you retell that story to someone else? You wouldn't do it word for word, but you'd, yeah.
Yeah, I think
So,
so.
yeah. So when we share a story, it's talking about communicating with clarity. Okay, so now I get the message, but you're going to remember it. And if you have to, you could retell it to other people. And that's, ultimately, that's what you're trying to do when you communicate. And the reason you'll remember it is because that story has tapped into emotion. Now, again, I said before, it's not about being emotional, it's not about being scared of snakes, but without you even knowing it or having any idea about it, it's tapped into emotion. And as human beings, as we spoke about, we make decisions based on emotion and we use logic to rationalize. So you still need the logic. It still needs to make sense, but we make decisions based on emotion. And we know this, whether you're buying a new pair of shoes or the latest iPhone or buying a house or buying into a strategy or buying working for you or working with you, they're emotional decisions. You then go through the logic to go, okay, does this make sense? And then you might ultimately change your mind if it logically does not make any sense at all. But once you've made the emotional decision, you can find amazing reasons to justify the logic. I know a few years ago, me and my husband, we weren't even really looking for a house, but we walked into this house we are in, and I would say within a minute, we'd both emotionally decided to buy the house. Now, we're not stupid. We went home and we worked through the numbers, but we were coming up with extremely logical reasons why we were spending 20% more than what we planned to. Now, if it had been this would be a really dumb decision and it logically made no sense, we would have changed our mind. But can you see how that's a really reluctant change of mind
Mm.
because we have already brought in emotionally. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In your Risk story, was it a red spider?
Uh, a redback spider, yeah, that's a very Australian spider.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with that spider, but as a writer, that struck me. I often tell my clients specificity leads to universality. And I feel like
Yes.
maybe if the story had said a spider, I might have even forgotten the spider part, but because you said a red-backed spider, the
Yeah.
specificity locks it in, and you're like, oh, that must be something, right? And copperhead snake as well. It's really interesting. You're obviously evoking images of threatening animals that humans have this kind of natural inclination to avoid, but then you're dropping details in like a redback spider or a copperhead snake, and
Yeah.
it really brings the story to life in a visceral way that I suspect adds to the impact and the memorability of that story.
You are absolutely spot on. Very
Mm.
great observation. And so what I've provided is enough detail for you to visualize it. You would have visualized it, right? And you got no idea what a redback spider looks like, but you would have visualized something. You'd be disappointed to know it's a tiny, tiny, tiny little spider. But as with spiders, the smaller they are, the more dangerous they are, mostly. But it's providing enough information for you to visualize it. And I loved your take on that the more specific you are, it's almost the more universal it is. And so people sometimes don't appreciate that, and they sort of go, oh well, like some people might go, oh well, I'm speaking to a global audience, and redback spider's an Australian story, so I'll just say a dangerous spider or a spider, and it doesn't have the same. So you're right, you don't need to know what a redback spider is, you don't even know what a copperhead snake is, but from what I'm saying, you've thought, well, they're clearly dangerous.
Mm.
And
Exactly.
then you will visualize your own dangerous scenario.
So the new book is called Story Intelligence. Can you break it down what that means? What is story intelligence?
Yeah, so I when I thought you would probably know, as a writing coach, one of the hardest things to do when writing a book is coming up with the title and then the subtitle, because that's sort of got to try to capture the whole book. Um, every working title I've had for my book, so I always have a working title to try to sort of keep me anchored on what I'm talking about, has never ever been the title. Like I've always thought it's going to be the title, always thought it's going to be the title, but the publishers never like it and it never gets the title, but they actually really like Story Intelligence. So I did have to come up with a description, because there wasn't, there's an emotional intelligence. There's descriptions for that. So my description of what story intelligence is, it's the ability to purposefully and skillfully use authentic storytelling to communicate with clarity and to connect, engage, and inspire. Now, it's a bit of a mouthful, but I think if the main phrases in this is purposefully and skillfully, like it is a skill, and you've got to do it, like you've got to know why you're sharing the story. You just don't want to be sharing random stories. And authentic storytelling, and it's so important for your stories to be authentic on so many levels. Not only true, factually happen, but you actually believe in the message. And then the whole reason we're doing this is A, to communicate with clarity so people get my message, but also to connect and engage and or inspire your audience. But the story builds the connection with your audience.
I was speaking with a client this week about writing under pen names, and he was wondering whether he should create like an AI image for his pen named author who was going to be a female, so a different gender than him. And I felt like maybe in the past I would have been like, go for it, invent a new identity. But what I ended up saying to him was, I feel like everyone is already so distrustful at this point of AI, and this idea of like we no longer know what's real in the
Yeah.
world. And I know this is a topic you touch on in the book. So can you speak to this idea of how do we be authentic in our storytelling in the face of an online media, at least, where it's no longer really clear what's real and what's fabricated via AI or any other tool?
Yeah, yeah. And again, that was the book. First of all, we were in a world of distrust. Follow the Edelman report, but they produce a global report every year, and they've been doing it for 20 years. And trust has been on the decline. And the last report they did showed that trust was at an all-time low across. They measured across like governments and media, and for the first time with employers. So trust was at a really low for employers. So everyone is distrusting, and rightly so, because we are fed so much fake news. And with AI generated content, it's not only the deep fake videos and images we're seeing, but it's the content. And you're just going, is that? And so now everything we consume, we are going, is that true? And so we're becoming quite cynical, rightly so, of how we consume information. I mean, Kevin, I don't know about you. When I grew up, it was like our news, or especially at our parents, would come from the one TV station and the one newspaper. And if it was in the newspaper and if it was on TV, in their mind, it was true. And, they were probably right. And so we don't have that now. We have to question everything. So I think I agree with you. If you're writing under, a different name and you're creating an image, people, it, I don't. It's just. I think it's going to do. It's like people can't trust that. Well, it's not credible, and it was sort of like, why would you not use your own name? And I get ghostwriting and all that type of stuff. And I'm even seeing pushback now is when we're using AI to refine our stuff. So it could just be like a newsletter to your team, and you're using AI to refine it. There's a lot of pushback now that the moment it feels like AI was involved, people switch off. And you know what? It might be switching. It's a disconnect. So it's like it's having the opposite effect of what we're trying to do, where we're trying to write and we're trying to connect with our audience, but the moment people think it's AI, they disconnect. And and I and I think this is a real danger that if people are having an over reliance on AI, and I've fallen into this trap myself, where I go, I'll just get AI, I'll put it through ChatGPT just to check it. It may sound good, but it's not you, and it's a real danger. So yeah, I think there's going to be real credibility issues the more and more we rely on AI to polish our content.
Let's bring that back then to the subtitle of the book,
Yes.
because it seemed like there was an opportunity here to take a stance against AI, right? Like story intelligence, authentic story against AI. But here you're saying here's how to work with AI to stay authentic. So was that a difficult decision to actually spin it that way, to say, hey, we are going to work with it?
Yeah, so again, so for your listeners, the subtitle is The Craft of Authentic Storytelling Made Smarter with AI. So that's the subtitle. If I answer this, it was when I started, when people asked me, can you use AI to help with your stories? Look, Kevin, that was my reaction. It was like, no, no, you can't. But as I started to explore it, it was like, well, it can be useful. It can be useful as your creative partner. So there was a lot of discussion to put it in the title. Even when I was coming up with the definition of story intelligence, my editor was saying, but you need to have AI in the definition of story intelligence because it's a book about AI. And it was like, I just kept, and I was like, we had lots of discussions, but in the end, I said, no, this is a book. There's 80, 90% of it is a storytelling book. You can be brilliant at storytelling, story intelligence, and never use AI. It's what I was doing, what we were all doing, like before 2 years ago. But when I started to experiment, you can use AI to help find your stories, predominantly find your stories. So, for example, Kevin, if you and I were sitting down for a coffee and you said, "Hey, I'm writing something and I'm writing about innovation and I'm trying to think of a personal story and I just can't think. I just can't think of a story. I don't have any stories." The first thing I would do is ask you all these questions. Like, well, can you think of a time when you just made one small little, change to something and it made a difference, it saved you time or whatever? Or can you think of a time when you didn't, someone was saying do this and you didn't? And so I'd just keep asking you question after question, and I guarantee you would think of a story. And so you can use AI in that way to say, act as my storytelling coach. I'm trying to find a story about X. Can you ask me questions to help uncover my stories? And so it'll just do that. And like, I think that is a brilliant way to use AI. I mean, you could use your friend for that as well. It's just like you don't have to use AI, but AI is available right there when you need them, and you don't have to buy them a coffee. So that's good. The danger, like, and I do talk about in the book, you can use AI to then refine your story, because what AI will do is will say, does choose one of these and give me some bullet points, and they'll turn it into a story, which can be useful. But then I take people through this process, right? So the AI will shoot back a story, and it fills in the gaps. It makes stuff up as it does, right? So it could have something in there like, I felt really excited about the prospect of whatever, and you might go, I didn't feel excited at all, I felt terrified. It was like, okay, well, so change that to be accurate. I felt terrified. So make sure it's actually factually true how you felt. And then the other thing is, say it out loud and make sure there's nothing in there that sounds AI, and you know what AI is like. I went from here to here, and uh,
It's not so much this as it is
yes,
that.
as that exactly. Yeah. And I use AI to check my writing. Not, I don't. I'm trying to not over rely on it, because I think that's the danger. But I did some once. I had to. I don't know. I had to write a couple of paragraphs on what I do, and so I started off with, I teach business people to communicate more effectively through stories, right? And I did some other stuff. Put it through, put it through AI. It came back with, I teach business people how to communicate effectively through stories that bridge the gap between trust and impact. And I'm thinking, what the hell? Um, I don't even know what that means, but there's a real danger to go, it actually sounds pretty good, doesn't it? It sounds good. And I might use that because it sounds good. But first of all, it sounds like AI and it doesn't sound like you. So that's when I say the real danger is, you've got to keep saying, does this sound like me? And if it doesn't sound like you, don't use it, because it sounds like AI. And the real risk then, I used to say the real risk is you're just starting to sound boring and bland like everything else. I think the real risk now is it's affecting your credibility, because
Mm,
people are going, you used the AI for that. It's almost, and it sort of does feel a little bit like cheating.
mm.
Like, imagine, so I just thought of this then. Imagine if you got a love letter from someone, from your love, and it was a love letter, and you went, oh, that's beautiful. And then they went, yeah, I just got AI to generate that. Like, you would instantly go, it would have the opposite effect, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I just thought of that. That's a good analogy. I'm going to write about that.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to that the Japanese art of filling in cracks in pottery and things with
Yeah,
gold, right? This idea
cool. Yep.
that perfection isn't that great. I come from a punk rock background, and so when I hear like super polished, perfect, auto-tuned pop music, I cringe. It's the wrong note. It's the microphone turned a little too loud. It's those imperfections that feel raw and real and authentic to me
Yeah.
musically. And so I agree. I think that's one of the losses when we do have AI polish everything to perfection. Well, where's the spelling mistakes? Where's the crossed out word in the love letter, right? It's like where's the I don't want to say humanity, but where is the cracks in the pottery that make it different from
Yeah.
all the other pots?
Yeah, it's that's another great analogy, Kevin. God, we're coming up with some good analogies here.
This interview is fire.
I know it's like let's. I always say real leaders aren't perfect, and perfect leaders aren't real.
Mm.
And I think when we're trying to be too polished, and but you know what I'm really excited about now, because people are sort of saying almost if there's a spelling mistake in your writing, it's almost a good thing because it's clearly not AI. And as I said right at the start, I'm a terrible speller and grammar, and finally, I'm just going finally,
Your
my
time has come.
weakness, my time has come. My weakness has become my strength.
I love
I'm
it.
just loving it. I go, so my English teacher, bloody, I knew it would pay off. I knew it would pay off eventually.
Well, the book sounds absolutely fascinating, and it obviously sounds very of the moment. And I don't think I've done an interview, and I don't think I've hosted a coaching session in the last year that hasn't touched on AI in some way. So obviously it's affecting every part of our lives and huge interest out there on it. So if folks are listening to this and they want to pick up the book, they want to learn about you and the work that you do, where can we send them?
Yeah, so the book's available globally, so on all Amazon, all the usual suspects. I'm really active on LinkedIn, so Gabrielle Dolan on LinkedIn. You find me, and you'll see me, hear me, or read me sharing stories. I also have my own podcast. I co-host it with a colleague of mine. So it's called Keeping It Real with Jack and Ral. I'm the Ral, and that's a podcast on all things work, career, leadership. People sort of say it's like having a little professional coach in your pocket. So if you like podcasts, which clearly you do because you're listening to Kevin's, then you can catch me there as well.
I checked out your podcast. I did listen to your latest episode, and you were talking about often in the workplace, we assume that we have the best intentions and assume
Yeah.
others don't. Fascinating conversation. So, highly recommend everyone check out the podcast. I really enjoyed the episode I would listen to this afternoon.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks so much for being on the show, Gabrielle. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, love it. And we came up with some brilliant analogies, I just might say.